Good afternoon, everyone. It's with great pleasure to welcome you to final session of today, Hysupply Project session. My name is Sami Kara, and I'm the chair of the session and one of the investigators in the Hysupply Project. As you may know, Hysupply Project has been initiated by German National Academy of Science and Engineering, ACATEC, and Federation of German Industries, BDI, and Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Australia, to analyze the potential supply of hydrogen and hydrogen-based energy carriers produced from renewables and establish a hydrogen partnership between Australia and Germany. Today, we have distinguished guests as panel members to talk about the progress of Hysupply Project. The session will be divided into two parts. The first part is brief addresses and presentation in terms of progress, and then it's going to follow up with a Q&A session. I just want to briefly introduce our distinguished guests. First, His Excellency Phillip Green, Australian Ambassador to Germany, Switzerland, and Liechtenstein. Our next guest is His Excellency Dr. Thomas Fitschen, German Ambassador to Australia. And our other guest is Professor Dr. Robert Schlögl, Director of Friedrich Institute, der Max-Planck-Gesellschaft. And our next guest is Mr. Holger Lösch, BDI Deputy Director General. Our other guest is Professor Iain Macgill. He's the lead investigator in the Hysupply Project and the Joint Director of Center for Energy and Environmental Markets. Our other guest is Dr.Will Rayward-Smith, partner and financial advisor in Deloitte. He's a specialist in decarbonization and clean energy transition. And finally, Dr. Rahman Daiyan. He's the lecturer and chief investigator in ARC Training Center for Global Hydrogen Economy and one of the investigators in Hysupply Project. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ambassador Green to give a brief remarks on Australian perspective on this opportunity from Germany. Ambassador Green, floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Professor Kara. Guten Morgen, Grüß Gott, Grüezi, good afternoon, hello, and Jumalundi. I welcome you with the word Jumalundi, which means hello and welcome in the language of the renewable people, who are the traditional custodians of the area around Canberra, Australia's capital. And I, together with my counterparts on the German side of the feasibility study, are joining you this morning from Berlin, Germany, where the sun is just breaking. We're up here very early to be part of your conference and delighted, Professor, that I'm able to be part of it. I'm going to make a few brief remarks. I'm very keen to hear more from Ambassador Fitschen, my counterpart, but the real stars of the show, Professor Schlögl, Professor Macgill, and Holger Lösch from the BDI, who are the key players in our work on the bilateral feasibility study and a key part of the partnership. I want to make just 4 points. The first one is very simple. It's very rare in someone's career as a diplomat, even someone's career as long as mine has been, to have the opportunity to be part of something as important as the Australia-Germany partnership on hydrogen. We all need to be part of the shift to a fossil fuel zero future. And it is an honour and a privilege to be able to be part of that. And that provides an opportunity for me and the others who are involved in this to seek to drive the partnership in that direction. But there's another element of that. For me as a diplomat, to be part of the ground floor of what could be one of the great new industries of Australia is enormously exciting. And it's for those two reasons that in my assignment here in Berlin, I have made hydrogen my #1 priority bar none, seeking to do whatever I can to build the basis for a supply chain in green hydrogen between Australia and Germany. Second point that I want to make is that there is a beautiful complementarity between Germany and Australia when it comes to hydrogen. I'm sure you've heard before, and you may hear from the speakers again in this session, that Australia is a place which is as favourable, if not more favourable, than any other in the world for the production of green hydrogen at low cost. On the German side, Germany is a country which will have, if it is to maintain anything like its current level of industrial output, including steel making and chemicals, Germany will need very large quantities of hydrogen in order to achieve its very ambitious climate goals. And so being able to find reliable sources of green hydrogen is going to be crucial for Germany. But it's not just the fact that we have a supply and demand capability here. I think it's very important that Australia is a place with a long and proud history already in the business of exporting energy. Through what we have done on LNG, we have an ecosystem of scientists, business people, government figures who know the business of exporting energy. And that puts us in a privileged position with Germany. And the final part of the beautiful partnership is the reality that Australia will need high quality manufactured goods in order to create the industry that we want. And every time that I hear project proponents in Australia talking about new hydrogen plants in Australia, I see the same sort of names, the same German names coming up. The need for plant and equipment, be it electrolyzers, pumps, storage, whatever, from ThyssenKrupp, from Linde, from Siemens Energy. So that's the final and key part of what is a very, very beautiful partnership. The third point I want to make to you today is that the Australian-Germany partnership is going very well. We are fortunate to have people at the head of their field associated with the feasibility study. We're now almost 1 year into the feasibility study. The first outcomes of that feasibility study are ready to be released and will be released within weeks. I want to give particular honour to Professor Schlögl, Robert Lösch, and Iain Macgill, all of whom will speak in this session, for the powerful way in which they have led this feasibility study. It is going really well, and they are working in close harmony. Just a couple of months ago, at the Cornwall G7 meeting, our leaders, Chancellor Merkel and Prime Minister Morrison, spoke together about the next phase in our bilateral partnership on hydrogen. And that is the Hydrogen Accord, which was signed just days before the Cornwall Summit. That commits governments to a range of new activities in relation to the bilateral partnership on hydrogen. In particular, $50 million funding from Australia and €50 million funding from Australia for incubators, which will look into and seek to resolve the really tough issues in the supply chain between Australia and Germany. That document also committed, also provide an offer by Australia for Germany to participate in one or more of Australia's hydrogen hubs. We would warmly welcome that as a demonstration, not only of the skills of German industry and science, but also as an act of support for the future of our industry. We in Australia are putting nearly $500 million into hydrogen hubs around the country. and it would be great to have German partnership in them. The document also speaks of Australia participating in one of the auctions, or one or more of the auctions that Germany is holding to even out the cost between supply and demand of hydrogen imported into Germany. So the partnership is in very good shape and remains an extremely high priority from the Australian government. And when I speak to those in the German government, I hear that it remains a high priority for them, and I'm very much looking forward to the next German government, which should be formed within a few weeks of today, to be able to work to drive the partnership even more closely together. I want to make one final point. The others on the panel will talk much more about the technical aspects of a supply chain in green hydrogen in Australia and Germany. But the question I am almost always asked in Germany is, yes, Ambassador, you're going to produce very low-cost green hydrogen, that's excellent, but haven't you noticed that Germany is on the other side of the planet from Australia? Isn't the cost of transport too high? And we need to address this, and we need to work harder on it in terms of the science and bringing down that cost. But I'm very reassured by some of the results that I see from the feasibility study. When we are talking about the export of green ammonia from Australia to Germany, it's pretty clear to me that the cost there will be less than 5% of the total cost of producing the product. So the cost of transport will be a relatively small cost in the total supply chain. And when we think about the very large quantities of hydrogen that Germany needs, it doesn't seem to me to be realistic that Germany will be able to get all of the green hydrogen it needs from its own country and from its near abroad. That means that long-distance transport by ship is going to come into the equation, and that means it becomes a competition between places like Australia, Chile, perhaps Saudi Arabia and North America. And one of the great things about the green hydrogen debate between Australia and Germany is that there's competition everywhere, and we very much look forward to that competition. So I will leave it there, Professor. Just one final, perhaps, advertisement. I hope that many of you will have in your calendars the fact that the 28th of January 2022, just a couple of months away, is the 70th anniversary of the bilateral relationship between Australia and Germany. And we at the Embassy in Berlin plan to celebrate 70 years in great style. We plan to call our celebration Shipping the Sunshine, and we'll be talking about the great food, wine and agricultural products that have been shipped from Australia to Germany for 70 years. But in particular, we're going to be talking about the next decades, which are shipping the sunshine in terms of green hydrogen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Green, for these positive remarks. May I please invite Ambassador Dr. Fitschen to give brief remarks on German perspective on this opportunity, please. Dr. Fitschen, you are muted.
All right. This is one of the things you have to learn with all the different systems. Find the mute button. Dear Professor Kara, dear participants, thank you very much for the introduction and for the opportunity to present a German perspective on this really exciting subject. And of course, I would also thank my colleague Ambassador Green in Berlin for sharing a bit of his personal mission. I think I can fully subscribe to that as well. As you have all witnessed, our cooperation on hydrogen issues has been significantly expanding over the past 2 years. This week alone, we have this conference, we have a webinar series on the Australian hydrogen hubs and the Global Race to Zero Summit. The reason for this is very simple. As we have just heard from Ambassador Green, there are obvious complementarities between Germany's future energy needs and Australia's ambition to become a major player in this field. Our two countries are well positioned to act as leaders and to combine our efforts in this area, as we already enjoy a very close scientific and economic exchange on issues such as energy efficiency or renewables for many years. Before I delve deeper into the role of hydrogen, let me just recall a few facts about the background of our specific interest here, which is Germany's energy transition, also known as the Energiewende. It means that we will overhaul our complete energy supply, moving away from both nuclear and fossil energy, and to replace them by renewable energy sources. This transformation of the energy system towards sustainable, clean, flexible, energy efficient and decentralized modes of energy use will affect all areas of our economy. The main reason for ramping up renewable energy is, of course, the fight against climate change. Germany is convinced that we must take decisive action now. We have to substantially reduce greenhouse gas emissions already within this decade to meet the targets of the Paris Agreement and achieve climate neutrality at the latest by 2050. Germany's Climate Action Programme 2030 and the binding climate action law passed at the end of 2019 and sharpened again last May sets ambitious targets for us. By 1990, and I repeat, that's 1990, we aim to cut our emissions by 65%. By 2030, we intend to cut emissions compared to 1990 by 65%. By 2040, emissions shall be less 88% compared to 1990 levels. And we also commit to achieve climate neutrality already by 2045. That was previously 2050. Germany considers decarbonization and energy transition also as a huge commercial opportunity, as it will transform our highly industrialized and energy import dependent economy into, as we hope, a competitive location for business and industries far in the future. Climate policy and the energy transition are by no means costly luxury investments. They are a necessary precondition of our future well-being. They are also a massive business opportunity. That is particularly true for the extremely dynamic hydrogen sector, which excites engineers and researchers, energy company executives, and government officials alike, and I know many of them listen today. Hydrogen has the potential to play a key role in decarbonizing our economy across numerous sectors. This includes, for example, Germany's steel, aluminium and cement industries, the chemical industry, and the transport sector, especially in areas where electrification is difficult, such as heavy goods transport, air and sea traffic. Germany is particularly strong and well positioned when it comes to research and development of hydrogen technologies, and leading German and European companies such as Mercedes, Siemens, Deutsche Bahn and Airbus are already developing hydrogen-powered trucks, trains and airplanes. Our ambition is twofold. We want to make Germany the world's leading provider of modern hydrogen technologies and to make hydrogen a marketable fuel. Under our 2020 National Hydrogen Strategy, the government will be supporting development of innovative hydrogen technology in production, transport over land and sea, as well as domestic and industrial applications in all sectors. The idea is to render these technologies rapidly cost neutral and to have them establish their own value chains in an emerging global hydrogen market. Our strategy is not based on any one technology, but it does focus on green hydrogen as a renewable energy. We will invest over 9 billion euros of public funds to support the market uptake of hydrogen. And out of this, 2 billion are designated for international partnerships within the context of hydrogen. So I'm sure Australia is listening. The strong support for international partnerships is no coincidence, as it is highly unlikely, and Ambassador Green has already hinted at that Germany will meet its demand for renewable hydrogen from domestic production. To meet its climate targets, the scale of Germany's hydrogen demand for electricity will be somewhere around 100 terawatt hours, and at the current pace, we will probably have green hydrogen capacities for an electricity demand from renewables of about 20 terawatt hours. So there is a difference there. For that remaining part, Germany will need reliable production and transport partners elsewhere, and a highly developed and reliable cooperation and import structures at home. Here, Australia comes into play with your immense potential for renewable energy generation and, of course, your ambition to export vast amounts of clean energy. At the same time, German and European companies are leaders in technologies such as electrolyzers, hydrogen filling stations, and large-scale hydrogen fuel cells. Now, doesn't that sound like a perfect match? Opportunities for our cooperation on hydrogen are huge. We are pleased to see industry, stakeholder agencies, governments take on the challenge. There's hardly a week without the announcement here in Australia and at home of another large-scale export-oriented green hydrogen project. Just yesterday, Austrade launched a webinar information series on Australia's Clean Hydrogen Industrial Hubs program for international partners, including from Germany. New agreements and collaboration activities between our countries are on the rise. We have, for example, an MOU signed by Germany energy company RWE and the hydrogen utility to develop hydrogen trading. We have a partnership between the German energy agency DENA and Australian Smart Energy Council. And of course, German companies like Siemens, ThyssenKrupp and Linde are already involved heavily in numerous hydrogen projects here in Australia. To bring market players together and assist cooperation initiatives, our German-Australian Chamber of Industry and Commerce has founded in November last year the German-Australian Hydrogen Alliance. And for its members, the AHK has established what they call an energy cluster to boost bilateral hydrogen cooperation in the private sector. Ladies and gentlemen, so there seems to be still some ground to cover for market ramp up, but let me summarize just a few points how our governments intend to support it. First, there's of course the joint feasibility studies on which many of you are already working. Second, Germany and Australia are already linked by an energy partnership via our bilateral energy working group. Thirdly, our governments have signed the H2 Accord in June 2021, already mentioned by Ambassador Green. And fourthly, Germany has released the first funding call for the international cooperation projects under its national hydrogen strategy 2 weeks ago. 350 million euros have been earmarked to fund both industry and research projects. The call is open worldwide, but of course we hope to receive many applications from our Australian partners. Ladies and gentlemen, not being a hydrogen researcher or company CEO, but a simple diplomat, I cannot conclude without pointing out that strengthening our cooperation in energy and hydrogen is also a key recommendation of the enhanced strategic partnership between Australia and Germany signed in June this year. So there is a clear political and strategic signal that we mean it. Phillip Green's team in Berlin and my own embassy have pushed very hard for that, and we are now very keen and enthusiastic to move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Dr. Fitschen, for mutually positive remarks. Now I'd like to move to the second part of the session. This is the Hysupply progress update. First, I'd like to invite Professor Iain Macgill to provide an update on the Australian developments. Iain?
Okay, thank you very much, Sami, and thank you, ambassadors, for setting the scene so clearly. Can you see my slides? Yep, okay, I'll take it you can. Let me know, Sami, if you can't. So yeah, I'm going to provide a quick update on Australian developments. As Ambassador Green flagged, we haven't quite been going a year, but we're getting onto that. And then following that, of course, we'll be hearing from our German colleagues with Holger Lösch from BDI and Professor Schlögl from Acatech. I do want to flag UNSW is leading the Australian side, and my colleagues Daiyan, Rose, Sami and Francois are all key players with that. We are partnering with some others, and Deloitte has played a particularly important role in the work to date. So I'd like to acknowledge that. More generally, we've been partnering with a very wide range of stakeholders across Australia. It's not in the thousands, but it's certainly in the tens, and across government, industry, key agencies, and other parts of the broad hydrogen sphere of interest. The usual disclaimers, of course, apply with that, but it's been great to get so much support and assistance from a wide range of partners. Many, I imagine, are in on this, so thank you. We thank you very much. So in terms of an update, clearly, and again, Ambassador Green flagged this, we have a state of play report, the case for an Australian hydrogen export market to Germany. It's a working paper for consultation. The state of play keeps moving, of course. And I'm going to use the term that Dr. Alan Finkel used this morning for his own energy, low carbon energy investment technology roadmap this morning, which is to say that it's pending. And we're hopeful that it'll be released very soon. I'll still be able to take you through the key work involved in that and some of the findings. So first we explore really the case for Australia, Germany. And part of that, of course, really revolves around the current nature of global energy trade. Most countries are importers or exporters. There's very few who have a very close balance of energy production and use. And those trade patterns are largely an outcome of the availability of easily extracted and low-cost fossil fuels. And it's worth noting Australia is the world's third largest energy exporter, or certainly was. This data does move around year to year. And Germany is a world top 5 energy importer. If we think about a green hydrogen future, and I should say that this Hysupply is focused on green hydrogen from electrolyzers. A mostly renewable world will be a more self-reliant world. Renewables are better distributed than fossil fuels. However, there are various countries that still seem likely to require energy imports, and Germany's one of those, and there's others in Europe, Japan and Korea. Now, there is, of course, some question around that. John O'Brien of Deloitte did flag offshore wind and the implications that might have for, say, Germany. Europe more generally, or Japan. But we're still likely to see trade. And if we take Australia, it has amongst the world's best high-class wind and solar resource, just in terawatt hours of good renewables. Good renewables, of course, are cheaper than less sun and less wind. And Germany's certainly got renewables. It's been a world leader in this space. But if you look at their current patterns of consumption, Ambassador Green talked about their industry structure. You know, they clearly see the need to be importing significant, certainly growing amounts of hydrogen to meet their energy needs. Now, Australia's just one of the players that could be involved in supplying that, of course, but we think we're a very good one, and we should look into that. Of course, trade relationships are generally multifaceted. Yes, price, of course, it's key, but it's not the only consideration. Existing trade relationships, stability, demonstrated capability, geopolitical considerations, proven infrastructure. And there's various ways those things get measured. And in the State of Play report, we do look at various factors, which, for example, are used in the World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Rankings. Australia also has significant government support, although, again, I think it was John O'Brien in the opening plenary who pointed out that the international competition amongst potential exporters is growing. I should say that this part of the report is a bit of a thankless task because things are moving so fast. So, for example, New South Wales, we really need to update it now with the launch of their strategy I think it was this week, wasn't it? So keeping up is difficult, as Ambassador Fitschen flagged. All in all, for a wide range of reasons, Australia's pretty well placed as a hydrogen energy exporter. You know, we're a global leader in energy exporters, great renewable resource, good in free trade agreements, ranked well in ease of doing business. We're good at getting FDI, good at developing. We've got government commitments, and it's not just us saying that. Most of the studies thinking about international hydrogen trade have also seen Australia as that. I do want to flag one particular thing, and this is from some Australian National University work recently undertaken, which just shows that renewables in Australia, the new capacity additions in 2020. Australia was second really only to the Netherlands on those countries studied. So our renewable deployment is growing very rapidly. And if we consider just the last month in the Australian national electricity market, it's 36% renewables in the mix, with over 30% of that, I think it is, around 30% being wind and solar. So there's been some challenges, but we're still deploying renewables and cleaning up our electricity sector at a rapid rate. Now, before I jump into the assessment, I do think it's important, isn't it, that we flag that a sort of becoming modesty is required for all assessments. And the last year, really last couple of years, if we think about COVID, have sort of highlighted that a number of commodities have been on a tear. Maybe some prices are stabilising now. And is it a super cycle or is it super mayhem, according to The Economist? We're seeing supply chain disruptions, which obviously is very challenging when you're trying to build major infrastructure projects. And perhaps our German colleagues will also flag some of the recent experiences in energy pricing that we're seeing in Europe at the moment. So we do need to be very cautious in these assessments. Things change and uncertainty only seems to be growing right now. But nevertheless, the State of Play report has made some estimates around hydrogen production costs in different places and for different configurations across Australia. And we consider green hydrogen, so it's electrolyzers powered by PV, wind, or both PV and wind, so-called hybrid solutions across two electrolyzer technologies. And we sort of have some cost estimates out there around levelized cost of hydrogen in different locations for different technologies and different supply mixes. So there's those findings, but the other thing is those findings come out of open source value chain models. And so if I just show you an example of that, this is the open source model underpinning those calculations. This particular example is for a site in New England, 100 megawatt site. Power plant duration curves over the year, electrolyser operation, because we've oversized the renewables, breakdown of cost components, cash flow analysis, capital cost breakdowns, and very importantly, hourly modelling. You actually get hourly electrolyser operation modelling, which is very important for thinking about how much variability you have to deal with. But also when you start thinking about conversion processes downstream, which may have rather different flexibility than electrolysers. Now, we've also in the report been thinking about green hydrogen production costs, and cost reductions are needed. I think we're pretty clear on that. Every cost reduction just makes this case stronger and stronger. Renewables cost down is super important as capacity factors up. Electrolyser costing and availability, very, very key. Opportunities to improve the integration, capacity factor optimisation across both off-grid and grid-connected projects. And then low-cost de-risked finance are all part of that. So with a mix of those cost reductions and finance cost reductions, we can hit the Australian stretch target. And we just did a bit of a look around the world, and the Australian stretch target's not that different, or far more ambitious than many of the other targets out there, be it EU, IEA, National Energy Agency, International Renewable Energy Agency, Bloomberg Hydrogen Council, and so on. Now, we do consider multiple pathways. And so from the electrolysers with intermediate H2 hydrogen transport and storage, we're considering liquid hydrogen, methanol, ammonia, synthetic methane, and LOHCs, the liquid organic hydrogen carriers. And they all have their strengths and weaknesses. I don't think a particular winner's come out because around from industrial feedstocks to ability and suitability for transport of hydrogen to be returned to hydrogen. In the end, you might argue, well, the customer is always right in terms of which ones they want to buy. You may think customers aren't always right, but it's clearly part of it but we see the importance of accessing all of these pathways, including the methanol and methane, which we heard a methanol presentation from Peter earlier today, and a really important opportunity with some low carbon challenges. And again, we've been modelling this. There's an awful lot of detail in this modelling. It is obviously very literature intensive in terms of the various varied and highly varying cost estimations out there in the literature. So many complexities around scale and how far into the future, and assumptions around cost reductions. But so we've been doing that modelling. Those open source models are less developed, so they're going to be a little slower out the gate than the hydrogen production cost model. Still, we have preliminary findings, and we have been building a shipping model. So there's a conversion model and a shipping model. We've been considering possible shipping costs from other possible places to the Port of Rotterdam than Australia. And this particular total value chain, let's call it indicative, hydrogen production costs, transport costs locally, storage locally, conversions to ammonia, of course, transport, shipping costs, fixed shipping costs, and variable shipping costs, as well as then reconversion. And shipping, of course, it's complex for shorter distances. Pipelines have a more attractive cost structure in some ways, although they are less flexible and involve considerable sunk assets, don't they? So a very key part of this is there's a lot of the cost in shipping is putting it onto the ship. How far you travel on the ship is significant, but as Ambassador Green said, it's not a dominant part of the cost structure. I just sort of wanted to then talk about the second piece of work that we have underway at the moment, and which is in road mapping. And although the language varies, commonly we talk about a strategy and vision. So we have various hydrogen strategies out there, from Australia's National Hydrogen Strategy some years back. Each of our state and territory governments generally have one, through to a road mapping exercise, through to what you might term action plans or execution plans. And so there's our strategy space, there's the road mapping space, and again we have a national hydrogen roadmap, we have the technology investment roadmap coming soon, West Australian renewable hydrogen roadmap, and then some states have sort of jumped straight into the action plans there. But this road mapping piece, well, firstly, there's a significant number of roadmaps out there, so you need to make a case as to what you're hoping to achieve with these, another roadmap. However, it's a really important part of the Hysupply project, because state of play, great. How do we take this forward? What are the key actions? Who are the key stakeholders? And so there's some work underway at the moment. Some of you listening may well have been part of our stakeholder consultations in that, and I should particularly flag the very important role that Deloitte is playing in this process. Part of obviously is don't reinvent the roadmap wheel. So what lessons can we leverage from existing exercises? We're currently in the consultation phase, and I think we're up to 40 stakeholder consultations now, and we're using that to draw out findings and insights. And then there's the synthesis phase. Our German colleagues will speak about their road mapping exercise as well, and obviously there's a process of bringing those together, which will be a really important part of the second year of work in Hysupply. So look, in summary, much to be optimistic about, I think, but much more to be done. Again, I'd like to thank the Hysupply co-leads, Professors Rosa Mal, Kondo Francois, Wezinsu, Sami Kara, Daiyan, of course. And then we've also got a great research modelling and data analytics team, including Haida, Charles Johnson, Phoebe Haywood, and Aaron Kuswara. So I think this is where we hand it over to the German colleagues, but hope that's been of interest, and obviously very happy to see your questions on Australian developments. Many thanks. Back to you, Sami.
Thank you, Ian. Now I'd like to move to our German project partners. First, I'd like to invite Mr. Holger Lösch to give us an update on the developments on the German side, please. Holger, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I will try to load up my slides. This and this. Okay. So, yeah, good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity. So I'm sharing this slot together with my dear friend and colleague, Professor Robert Schlögl from the Max Planck Institute. We would like to give you a few impressions on what is happening on the German side. So I have to be honest, almost everything has been touched in the previous speaker slots, but I will try to come up with, or we will try to come up with some new information. But first of all, I have, oh, where is it? I have to find my slides again. Sorry. Okay, but first of all, we have to look what is the major driver for an emerging hydrogen economy in Germany. And of course, this is our national climate policy, which is of course closely linked to the European Green Deal, the Fit for 55 program. And we have a new climate law since July this year. And this has enhanced the targets another time. So we are looking now at climate policy targets, CO2 reduction targets by 2030 of -65% and getting to climate neutrality by 2045. So this is, of course, creating an enormous challenge. On the other hand, I would say globally, there will be insight that we will have to get to climate neutrality around mid of the century. And therefore, I think it's very sensible and meaningful to look at the paths, how we can go there. We in BDI are publishing tomorrow a new study. We worked 7 or 8 months on that to come up with a possible path to get to climate neutrality, or especially to get to -65% in Germany by 2030. On this slide, you see, well, very rough numbers of the challenge by 2030. It means to reduce the CO2 emissions in the energy sector by 61%, in the transport sector by 43%, and in industry by 37%. This means that we have to come up with a lot more renewable electricity, means a lot more of PV, a lot more of wind on and offshore, and of course the grids you need for. It means to a lot of electromobility in the transport sector, and it means a lot of electrification in industry. But direct electrification is something which is not working for every sector equally well. What we see is that green electricity is going to be the foundation for all of this, not only in Germany. I think it is going to be the foundation for any transformation process globally, but not the direct electrification alone will do the deal. So we will need a lot of, let me put it like, an indirect electrification, and this is where hydrogen comes into play. We will see a lot of hydrogen in the energy sector. We will see a lot of hydrogen in the transport sector, especially with the heavy cars and of course airlines or airplanes and ships and so on. And there is a huge need for hydrogen or derivatives in industry. So this is a sort of a sneak preview on the study we are going to publish tomorrow. And on the left, you see the centers of industry production in Germany on the card, on the map. and it's glass and stone and cement and paper and steel and ammonia and methanol. So this is what is where we have a lot of production which needs hydrogen in the future. The number says what we expect to be the demand for green hydrogen or power to liquid by 2045 in Germany, and this is amounting together to around 538 terawatt hours a year. Just to give you an impression what we are using today, hydrogen is used in Germany in parts of chemical industry and especially in the oil business and the refineries. And the amount which is of course produced great today by steam reformation is about 55 terawatt hours a year. So we are talking about a 10-fold rise in demand until 2045. Well, this is a lot. And on the right side, we have written up our expectation where this does come from. And looking at hydrogen itself on the far right, we see, well, a considerable amount of this probably can be produced in Germany or Europe by wind offshore or photovoltaic or wind onshore. It's perhaps 42%, but the major part will come from outside sources, which is 58%. The equation becomes much different when we're looking at the so-called power to liquid. So everything, synthetic fuels, methanol, and all of these things, which we will need in even larger numbers than the pure hydrogen. And they will be based on hydrogen as well. And there we see a 97% import rate versus 3%, negligible 3% of domestic production. So this is, in a nutshell, the case which says we need something like Hysupply. We need to come up with a global market on hydrogen and its derivatives, and we have to get this into scale as quickly as possible. Because we have to change in industry. Our companies have to change the way they use heat, they produce heat, they use energy. So all of this has to change, and it has not to change in 2045. It has to change until 25, which means we need to get going extremely fast. So this is the chance where I would say a partnership between Australia and Germany makes absolute sense. I mean, there will be several regions globally which will be developing new value creation structures, post-fossil, non-fossil value creation structures. But of course, Australia has a very dominant role in this. It is already a large energy exporter, as the other speakers already said. And it is a Western country. It's a partner in the Western Alliance. It's a country which is on a level playing field in economic issues, in scientific issues, the rule of law, and all of this. And it's a long-time partner. I mean, German steel companies get iron ore from Australia, and they get coal from Australia, LNG of Australia. So everything has a history together with Australia and Germany. And this is why we said when we went to, I forgot one thing, sorry. So there is a huge demand. It can be realized between Germany and Australia, probably, and more, well, very, very clearly, not only between Germany and Australia, but what we can develop in this project can be a role model and a pilot project with knowledge created, which can help everybody in the world who wants to run a hydrogen partnership to be to create this. But of course, we are looking at the prime mover advantage, and so Australia has every opportunity to create a lot of green hydrogen. On the other hand, to create green hydrogen at a very, very business viable cost will need a lot of development in terms of technology. And there you see that Germany is not only having a demand for hydrogen, we only can offer also can offer things. You see the market shares in electrolysis technologies and power to X, other power to X technologies, and what you see is a very dominant role of still very dominant role of Germany and Europe. So this can be a perfect match between Australia having very good opportunities or conditions to produce hydrogen, and Germany and Europe having a lot of demand, but having a lot of experience and expertise on the technology side. So one more thing, when we went to Australia in 2019, I think that this was perfect timing, because the discussion then just began. And so we had the great opportunity to meet Alan Finkel, as you see on these pictures, Robert and me, together with Alan Finkel. And I think that this was the perfect time to start something like this. And what we have seen over the last months with the colleagues from Australia is that there is a lot of understanding between us. So we discuss a lot, and we are really looking forward, after those terrible COVID times, where we all worked on our own and exchanged views via video conference. First of all, to get to Australia next year, and for the Australian friends, hopefully to come to Germany during this project. And so we can now share our input, our findings of these preliminary works, the state of play, and our meta study we did. And so this can be a very good time the next year to come up with something very comprehensive, which then enables real business project. And this is what it's all about. We want all of these companies you see here, those are the German companies and scientific institutes who are part of our project. So this is basically the who is who of every large industry company in Germany who has a real interest and already ties to Australia. And this is where we want to have things to happen. But before we can go on for that, there is still a lot of things which have to be looked at, which have to be solved, which have to be optimized. And this is where my friend Robert is always very pushy and trying to make this happen. And this is why I will hand over to him in this phase to say what we are still looking at on the technological and on the scientific side. Robert.
Excuse me. So good afternoon, everyone over there in the beautiful Australia. What I want to do here is I try to dig a little bit deeper. First, you see here our summary. I hope you can read it. At least I can do. So it has been said by all the previous speakers, this is a perfect match between our two countries. And the only big issue that one sees is, as Ambassador Green says it, is it really possible to transport bulk amounts of renewable energy around the globe? And is it also economically feasible to do that? And the answer is very simple, yes, it is possible. And when we look back to what we have seen so far in the history, there was always a possibility to create a global market if there was a global demand for it. And I think it is extremely important that we first stress that the new energy system that we have will only be working and can only rely on a stable future if you have a global energy market. And the global energy market of renewables means it cannot be electricity only. It is evident because that is difficult to trade around the globe. And for this very reason, it is important that we deal with this chemical part of it. So hydrogen is of course only the materialized form of renewable energy in form of bound electrons, as electricity is free electrons. And if we have these bound electrons, then we can do many different things. Transport and storage is one thing. The disadvantage that is always put against it is, of course, it costs efficiency, yes, because any conversion of energy into another form of energy is a loss in process efficiency. But then we have to think, what are our options? Our options are either we use the process efficiency that Mother Nature has given us with fossil fuels, and there all the efficiency thing was done 10 million years ago when we were not at the planet and the word efficiency was not invented. Or we decide we go into a future that is of infinite supply of energy, and then we have to deal with how do we make it available in space and time where we need it. And for that we need energy conversion processes. These energy conversion processes in total have a round-trip efficiency of something between 10 and 20% with respect to what is the input of primary energy that you give. They would say, as an engineer, this is absolutely terrible. There's an enormous need to increase the efficiency. But I would ask you to consider what is our level of comparison. It is unfair to compare it to fossil efficiency because, as I say, most of the process efficiency in fossil has been done by Mother Nature and we did not have to count for it. When we go now for the living Mother Nature that we see today, these are the green leaves, then we would say their process efficiency to convert solar energy into chemicals is about 0.6 to 0.9%. And compared to that, we are certainly competitive, given that Mother Nature had 4 billion years to improve the whole system, and we have about 25 years, then we would say we are doing not so badly. What we learn from Mother Nature is another important issue, and this is, it is simply critical to look at the system service efficiency and not at the process efficiency of any one of the individual steps. And of course, if we think that we have a renewable energy future, then we definitely need to think about the redistribution, storage, trade, make it available where it is needed in that form that is optimal needed. And when we consider these aspects, then I think we should a little bit step down from this efficiency argument and say it is simply not efficient not to use direct electricity, but we can safely rely on the idea that we use as much primary electricity as we can, and everything where we cannot use it, we take our bound molecules. And the question of how much bound molecules we need in comparison to electricity will vary from place to place on this planet, because there are areas where there is beautiful electricity, renewable electricity available, and there is storage in form of hydro or biomass available, that's fine. But there are large amounts of the planet where this is not the case, and exactly there we need our chemical energy conversion. So hydrogen must be a global commodity, and it is one of the key issues of the international collaborations to really establish this global commodity issue, and going away from this idea that hydrogen and renewable energy is something very valuable. In Germany, we have this very negative saying that hydrogen is the champagne of the energy transition. No, that's definitely wrong. Hydrogen is the table water of energy transition. It is the most important commodity that we will definitely get. And if we can get this out of our brains, it would be extremely useful, because then we are free to see how many options we have. And it has been said by all the previous speakers that this hydrogen transition, which I would like to call, is in particular a process of many options. There's so many possibilities that we can see that we should not try to limit us and say this is valuable and this is too inefficient. No, it's not. So when we look a little bit deeper into these technological issues, then we see it is of course necessary first to convert electrons into hydrogen. This is done by electrolysis. There are in particular at the moment in generation 1 challenges of produce electrolyzers better and cheaper than we do this now. So I tend to say what we need is a so-called Volks electrolyzer, the same way as we needed a Volkswagen or a Ford. We need the same thing, a very cheap, rugged, stable, not necessarily most effective and most beautiful electrolyzer, but one that is scalable around the globe. And that is something that we do not have at the moment, and it is certainly one of the key elements where we need to work on. Then once we have hydrogen, then if we are lucky, then we have pipelines, but we have heard there is pros and cons to pipelines. Pipelines are cheap, but they bind you for a long time. And if you want to be flexible, or if you want to make a global market, you need container transport. That means you need to bring this thing into a ship. Now, hydrogen has this unfortunate properties that is very light and it's very difficult to make it into a liquid or even a solid. And that is the reason why liquefaction of hydrogen is certainly a big, still scientific and material science challenge that we will see how it works out. But even so, if we would then reconvert the liquid hydrogen into gaseous hydrogen, then we can ask ourselves, what do we do with hydrogen? And there is not necessarily most of the applications are suitable for gaseous hydrogen direct application. We might need indeed what has been said also by Holger, the PTL part. That means hydrogen in a usable form by end users. And hydrogen in a usable form is definitely a liquid, because we all know that our technology base is best when we have as an energy storage a liquid. And why should we not take this concept and this principle? Also, our own body uses this principle, by the way. When you think, why are we so energy efficient? It's because we keep our energies in liquids. And we might do the same here. So further energy conversion is also necessary. And then we come to the molecules that have been outlined by the previous speakers. I dare to add, there are still a few more options that we should consider, in particular when it comes to e-fuels. And this interesting fight that we observe in Germany or in Europe against e-fuels because they are so inefficient is also something that I guess will go away, as well as it went away that about 10 years ago everybody said energy transition is electricity only and we don't need any molecules. So I think we should quietly sit back, and we have heard modesty is a good thing in this idea. We should really try to pave the way for all forms of renewable energy, irrespective of what people think at the moment. It is extremely important that we have all options available, and scientists or science has the prime option to lay the foundations of this. We need the understanding of it, we need the production technologies, and we need also the understanding in the economic part of it. So what is where the most suitable operation? Something that I would like to mention, because Holger said I'm looking down into, say, the machine room of the technologies, something that has been said only very briefly, which is a key issue when you deal with large scales of renewable energy, is of course fluctuations and dynamics. Essentially, all our chemical processes at the moment are designed in such a way that they operate under constant conditions, because that is the apparently most simple thing that we can do. But that is not necessarily the best thing to do if we have a fluctuating input at large scale. Some people think, okay, we need storage in order to ease out the fluctuations, but that is not necessarily, again, the best possible option. So to convert our existing chemical energy conversion technologies from a steady state operation into a fluctuating operation is definitely a very fundamental issue. It creates not only technological and economic questions, but it also creates very deep rooting scientific questions, because we have then to ask ourselves, what is the dynamic interaction between interfaces and molecules? And there we understand still very little. What I would like to say here is the energy transition and also high supply is not necessarily only about economics and big ships and bringing together users and suppliers of hydrogen. It is also an issue about deep-rooted scientific questions that simply arise from the ramification of its application. And finally, I would like to make only one point that I think is sometimes forgotten also in this discussion, because also Holger said this, we are very keen and driven by the idea that we have to exit from fossil energy in order to preserve the climate. And I dare to say, before you exit from something, you need to enter into something different, because we always need energy. And it is a good idea that we look first into our options that we have in the future. And when we look into these options, then we find market to work as quickly as possible and as big as possible. And why should we do this? In the end, there are, of course, a lot of people in the audience, possibly even they say, well, this climate protection is not a really good thing because we throw away a very cheap energy source and we develop now a more expensive energy source, and this is only because of climate change. I think this is a debatable argument, but a non-debatable argument against this is we are switching from a from a resource of energy that is exhaustible and that will exhaust after about 1,000 terawatt years, to an infinite source of energy that is there forever. It is clean, it costs nothing, it comes for free. And the only thing that we have to do is we have to solve this problem of unsuitable space and time distribution. So that means we convert our energy system from something that has to be evaluated by the amount of energy by volume or by weight into something that could be operated as a flat rate system, because the energy input is gratis, it comes for free. All what we need is the infrastructure to exchange and redistribute it. And possibly this is a better idea if some people are still in doubt that it is necessary to do something about climate protection. It is definitely necessary to do something to put our well-being in the future onto an energy basis that is inexhaustible. And that is maybe a very strong argument also for the future. With these ideas, I would like to give back the floor to the conference. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Holger and Robert, for the German side updates. This is the end of actually the first part of our session. Now, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Daiyan to moderate the Q&A session. Daiyan?
Thank you, Sami, and thank you, ambassadors and distinguished speakers. That was very insightful on the progress of Hysupply and next steps. Now, there are a couple of questions coming up from the floor. Maybe I'll start with, so one of the questions is that there are a lot of enabling support from the different respective governments and definitely a lot of interest from industry in both countries to unlock this value chain. So there has been a lot of discussions for quite a long time. Now, how do we really translate all this, interest and support meaningful projects? How do we get there? Maybe I ask Ambassador Green, followed by Ambassador Fitschen, then followed by the Hysupply team for their comment.
Thanks very much, Daiyan. It's a really good question because there is, to some extent at the moment, a gap between producers and potential consumers of green hydrogen. With consumers, especially those I speak to in Germany, not yet ready to change their plant and equipment to utilise green hydrogen because they're uncertain about levels of supply at reasonable cost. And producers finding it difficult for their spreadsheets to turn out with a positive number on the bottom because they don't know what the level of demand is going to be and at what price going forward. So a couple of things that we're doing. I mean, first of all, we're promoting, the Australian government is providing support, especially through hydrogen hubs, and a range of state governments who are producing a range of support. We're supporting things like our incubator studies. That's designed to bring costs down and to make them more transparent. The next thing that the German government is doing, and this is vitally important, is running a series of auctions for the import of green hydrogen from other locations, including Australia, where the German government would pay some part of, or perhaps the whole part of, the difference between the lowest price at which a producer was prepared to land green hydrogen, let's say in Rotterdam, and the highest price that a user in Germany was prepared to pay for it. Now, that's a powerful dynamic, and that will help to kickstart the industry, and that's why the Australian government is ready to play its part in that. But the final point I want to make is this. There's one player in all of this who's not yet been mentioned, and it's difficult for me to bring up one commercial player in Australia, but I think one does deserve attention. And that's Andrew Forrest and what he's doing with Fortescue Future Industries. Now, his play is important for two reasons. Firstly, because he's prepared to throw a lot of money at it and a lot of energy, and he's doing that now. But it's also important for a second reason. And that is that his plan, at least in the early stages, is to produce green hydrogen in Australia in order to take the fossil fuel element out of his iron ore operations in Western Australia and be carbon neutral by 2030. So he breaks that gap between producer and consumer because he will become his own off-taker. So I think that's going to be a powerful dynamic in commodifying green hydrogen. In the meantime, the rest of us can just press ahead with the things that we're doing and look for the moment, which I don't think is very far away, where a supply chain between Australia and Germany gets kick-started and then the flywheel starts to turn.
Ambassador Fitschen.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I sense in the question a little bit, the question, can we buy it? Is it just a matter of funding, more money to be made available for more ideas? We don't think so. Just two observations. First of all, government funding, I think, can only be a means to get industry out of starting blocks. You can't expect government to fund this forever. That's why we aim to make our funding calls as flexible as possible, just also in response to what Professor Schlögl has said, to keep options on the table and to reduce bureaucracy as much as possible, to make it flexible and, so to speak, user-friendly, to allow the most innovative and the most promising projects to succeed and not have government decide before it even starts which one is the best and which one we do not want to fund. Second, we think that a strong linkage between industry and research is crucial for future successful projects. As we've just heard, there's so much research still needed until we know what to produce and how to produce it. So that's why we have structured our funding programs for hydrogen also in such a way that they stimulate cooperation between research and industry as a prerequisite, so to speak, for future industry and business development. So those are the two main observations that I would like to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Hysupply team, any comments on that? Yes, Holger.
Yeah, I would like to emphasize this. It is very important that we look at what is needed. First of all, there needs to be a decision to change from today's fossil system into a non-fossil system for an individual company. This decision can be made, but you have to look at the operating costs. As of today, if you switch from today's gas or even coal to green hydrogen or to electricity, this is multifold more expensive than in operating cost than today's system. And this is where I think governments need to come up with solutions, as long as not the whole world is operating on the same CO2 price. This, of course, would make it not necessary to have any solution for that. But this gap to competitiveness is going to be the major problem over the next 10 to 15 years. And this has to be solved. This is going to be a major part of the equations in our study we are going to publish tomorrow. And this means we have a double interest there. So companies want to have want to change to the new thing. It's not competitive today, so governments will be confronted with demand for support in operating and of course in capex and opex, and therefore the government should have a huge interest to make these things as quickly as possible business viable, because this is going to reduce their fiscal burden, which they need to develop share to save companies from losing global or even domestic competitiveness. And I think that's the core of the issue, and this makes our project and other projects which are working on this, how we get the new thing as quickly as possible into business logic, so important. So what we do here is, first of all, we try to save the future of companies, and with saving the future of companies, saving the future of states, of course. And the second thing is we're trying to save, well, the money of the state, and therefore we have to be successful very, very quickly to get things down in cost, and this works only by scale. And so we have to get to scale in operations as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Holger. Yes, Robert.
I would like to add 2 points. Of course, there's no contradiction to what Holger said, but it is also important that the economic participants also understand this. They should not sit and wait until the state facilitates the transition. They have to do quite a bit of the job by themselves. And this, of course, requires trust, because if you do this kind of transition, this is risky for the operation, it was said by Holger, and the element of trust and the element of foresight and stable planning is extremely important. And also in this respect, Hysupply is a good indicator, because it was said several times, wherever you might also find hydrogen, but it is very likely that an Australian-German hydrogen alliance in an economic sense will be a stable long-term operation. And this is something which is extremely valuable. Another point that I would like to point out is, of course, one of critical elements of this hen-egg problem is infrastructure. It was mentioned several times that there is an issue between the off-taker and the producer. And of course, as long as the ships is fine, ships you can build, and this is rather simple. But when you think the on-land infrastructure that you need, so this is pipelines, ports, and the distribution system that comes afterwards, that is a significant issue, because you need to invest upfront in this, and this is quite expensive. This is long-term investment at a time where you do not know exactly what your revenue will be, because we do not know how the market prices will develop. And here I see a critical element in collaboration between states, because that is something, this is foreseeable infrastructure for the well-being of the people, and that means this is a job of the states to do that. And I'm absolutely convinced that if we could try to use this Hysupply operation also to convince both sides in the states that infrastructure that is on land and that is necessary in order to make this possible is something that one should develop jointly, that would be a very practical thing to overcome the deadlock that we have at the moment.
Thank you, Robert. So when it comes to, we have all flagged this discussion about scaling it up. And with respect to scaling, there are certain participants who discuss that blue hydrogen perhaps may allow us to reach scale very quickly, and then we try to decarbonize and clean it up. Now, Hysupply, of course, is a green hydrogen project, and we're exploring that. But what are the thoughts from the German side? Would Germany entertain blue hydrogen with appropriate, accreditation and certification as the first source of hydrogen?
Yeah.
Maybe Holger or Robert. Yeah, Robert.
This is a politically touchy question. This is why maybe I go first, because I'm a scientist. So I would say very simple. If you really want to go up in economy of scale as quickly as possible, we have simply no other choice of doing that. That means as an interim situation, that is fine for me, because that is the only way how we can really get to volume quickly. And in the end, it is extremely important, again, what I said about trust. If I can trust that this hydrogen is blue and not black, then I think there's nothing wrong with this. It gets wrong at the point where we create a significant infrastructure for CCS, because then we create path dependencies that might make it very difficult that the blue hydrogen in the end will disappear. We had done this in our studies and, of course, found that blue hydrogen could potentially be, for a long time, be cheaper than green hydrogen. And there's, of course, then always this idea that this is not a transition technology, but this is a long-term system. And There it is a question because I personally consider CCS as a non-safe solution. There's a limited margin where one can do this, but there is definitely, as a general solution for the planet, this is not on. We cannot do that. It's not sustainable. That means the practical answer is yes, as a booster, it is perfectly okay. And we should not be so sensitive. My personal view is we should rate hydrogen not in colors, because hydrogen molecules are colorless, but we should rate hydrogen in the amount of CO2 backpack that it brings with it. And then we say steam reforming of methane is our benchmark, and anything that is better than steam reforming of methane is, of course, welcome. And we strive for, at the time when the hydrogen economy is fully developed, that this CO2 backpack is minimal. I would also mention very clearly there will be never a CO2 backpack that is zero. That is when you make the system analysis simply realistic enough, then you will always find there's some residual CO2 with it, but of course it is way less than we have now. And for that reason, I would say, if we go on the pathway and say we want to minimize the CO2 backpack of hydrogen as it grows in dimension, then I don't care about the color anymore.
Yeah, Rahman, perhaps I can add to this. Well, first of all, I think that the future has to be and will be in hydrogen from renewables and green hydrogen. And let me emphasize this as a representative for industry. I mean, as an industry, when I'm looking at market and technology chances, I see those in green hydrogen, in electrolyzers, in great system technology, and so on. I don't see this in blue hydrogen. But if it comes to very imminent and quick demand, of course, we are clear enough to see that in the beginning to change to hydrogen in using or in doing industry work, we probably will need amounts of blue hydrogen. But blue hydrogen is going to mean that it is limited to those who are in access to fossil sources. Green hydrogen is a different game. It's all about technology. It's not about subterranean resources you have. So it's a more democratic kind of energy. So there was one question on how I think it's important to talk about this. Our next government is probably set up from Social Democrats. They will have the Chancellor, the Greens, and the Liberals. And they are in the process of negotiating. They are starting tomorrow to negotiate a real coalition treaty. And I think what will be important to keep our project and our idea of a German-Australian partnership in the political race and high on the political agenda, of course, would be that we see sort of a political commitment from the Australian government that Hysupply is important, or hydrogen and German partnership is an important part of their future energy and business strategy. This, of course, would help a lot if we really could show this government that everybody's serious on that. And of course, we need quick success in terms of setting up good papers and fostering real business coalitions and real business projects. And there's a lot of talk in the background going on between companies here and there.
Thank you, Holger. In the interest of time, although we still have a lot of questions, maybe we'll answer those offline. In the interest of time, I would now pass it on to Will, just to summarize, the panel discussion and all the different presentations. Up to you, Will.
Fantastic. Thank you, Daiyan. I think it's been a great session, and thank you everyone for your participation, both the speakers, panelists, and for the questions from the audience. So firstly, we heard from Ambassador Green, who shared with us really the #1 focus being green hydrogen, and that being a next evolution of shipping the sunshine, and how there's the beneficial reciprocal nature of the partnership, with Australia needing Germany's manufactured technologies. Secondly, we heard from Ambassador Fitschen, who highlighted Germany's energy transition, a 65% reduction by 2030 compared to 1990 levels, and how there's the need for hydrogen in parts of the economy that are hard to electrify. And that's a huge commercial opportunity for Germany. From the Hysupply Project teams, we heard about the progress and next steps. So from Professor Macgill, we heard about the state of play report with the working paper due to be released shortly, and some fantastic open source models coming too. Also, Australia being well placed to be exporter, and how the current roadmap is focusing on the activation of the German-Australia value chain and the actions for both private and public sectors. Holger Lösch and Professor Schlögl shared with us the new Climate Change Act and what that means for indirect electrification, the scale of the opportunity being hydrogen power to liquid demand of 538 terawatt hours per year in 2045, and really comparing that to the demand today for hydrogen being 55 terawatt hours. So we also heard the 97% import for power to liquid and 58% import for hydrogen, with the meta-analysis report coming soon too. And we love the description of hydrogen as the table water of the energy transition, not the champagne. The Q&A covered a few quick items around unlocking the opportunity and also hydrogen colors, and actually maybe this move to a CO2 backpack description. I think what we've really seen through this session is that deep collaboration will be required between Germany and Australia to activate this value chain. We know the scale of the opportunity, both from what we've heard today, but also from earlier modelling as part of the National Hydrogen Strategy. You know, even under a cautiously optimistic scenario for Australia, there's an opportunity to create 7,600 jobs and add about $11 billion per year in additional GDP by 2050. So I'll now turn back to Daiyan. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for all the discussion presentations, and we look forward to working with all of you in the future as we try to develop and progress our Hysupply project.